This episode is brought to you by my fertility awareness programs. Master fertility awareness and improve your menstrual cycle health at the same time. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/workwithme for more information. That's fertilityfriday.com/workwithme. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 163. Welcome to the 163rd episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm really excited to share today's episode with you. Today's guest is Robin Shrigley, and we talk about her experience with PCOS. So she actually shares her story, her personal experience, and how she was able to overcome her symptoms, and why she now actually works to support women to also do the same thing. So it's a really inspiring story, and I'm really happy to have her on the show today. I find it so interesting. So many of the guests that I interview have similar stories where either they had a personal challenge that caused them to enter the work that they did, or a family member was affected. And so it's one of the questions that I usually ask, partly just because I'm really interested to know how people came into their professions. And as my longtime listeners will know, the reason that I came into this field, there's a couple. there's many reasons, but one of the reasons is because I struggled for years with painful periods, and I had my own diagnoses. I was diagnosed with fibroids when I was quite young because I made the doctor do the test, and I was also diagnosed with hypothyroid at a relatively young age. So overcoming my own health challenges and really the whole time having charting on the periphery and being able to see how my charts would shift when I made different changes. So when I was first diagnosed with thyroid, my charts were completely different than they were now because it was an undiagnosed thyroid condition that was just kind of wreaking havoc on my chart. And so throughout the 15, 16-ish years that I've been charting my cycles, I've been able to see these incredible changes and shifts just throughout the years based on what I'm doing. And so that's what I strive to bring to you, that deep understanding of how your cycles are intimately connected to your overall health. And that's what I do in my programs. So if you are looking to deepen into your understanding of fertility awareness and really gain that confidence, one of the reasons that I do my programs is to help women to become really confident. So if you're looking to use the method for birth control and you're concerned that you don't feel as confident as you'd like to, or if you're wanting to gain a deeper insight into your cycle and how it relates to your overall health, then make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/workwithme. And on that page, I have listed all of the different programs that I have. So make sure to head over there for more information. So again, that's fertilityfriday.com/workwithme. Now let's jump into today's episode. And today I'm very excited to welcome my guest, Robin Shrigley, to the show. Robin, otherwise known as the Hormone Diva, is a holistic nutritionist and women's health coach, and as well as a nutritional coach. And Robin's own journey with PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, jump-started her passion for helping women replace their anxieties with joy to open up possibility in their lives and break free of hormonal imbalance. And in today's show, we're going to be talking about hormones and the role that diet and other lifestyle factors play in balancing hormones and obviously restoring menstrual function and fertility. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Robin.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really excited. And we were just chatting in the pre-chat. We realized that Robin and I live maybe 20 minutes from each other. So that's crazy. That's the closest. Well, I did one interview where Dr. Nora Pope came to my house. So that was a lot of fun.
Oh.
So I've done one interview on the show so far that was in person. But yes, this is a lot of fun because often I'm interviewing people from all over the world.
Yeah.
Well, I'd love to start by delving into your story a little bit. And so it was your journey with PCOS that actually inspired you to start what you're doing. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to share my story. And it starts, I think, like a lot of us who have health issues from way back when we were kids. And not that I really ever had major health issues myself as a child, but I was more witnessing what my family was going through. Both my parents were on lots of medications. They had all different types of illnesses, high blood pressure, cholesterol, all of that, usual stuff. And it scared me to think that that could happen to me later in my life. And eventually this kind of led into me being really interested in health and how the way that we live, whether it's our food or our lifestyle, is going to play into our health. And I started researching that a lot as a teenager, but didn't choose this, nutrition as a career choice right away. But it was actually when I was in university for something entirely different that I realized I was in the wrong field and I wanted to get into nutrition. And so once I was in nutrition school, I learned a lot about, health, obviously, but also the birth control pill and the potential negative effects that can come from using that medication. And I had been on it about 7 years at the time. And it kind of scared me to think about, the potential risk for blood clots and increased risk for cancer and problems with fertility and all of this kind of stuff. And before I was on the pill, my periods were never regular. They were always super heavy. So I already had some issues in that regard. And so I decided to stop the pill while I was in school. And I didn't have any kind of safety net as far as like supplements or like supporting my body to come off the medication. So everything just went haywire after that. And I gained a lot of weight. All the painful, deep and embarrassing cystic acne I had as a teenager came back with a vengeance. My mood got worse, and as if it wasn't bad enough already. And I had a history of use with antidepressants and all of that. And so I was really confused as to why things were going so crazy. Like I thought, there'd be a little bit of a withdrawal period or whatever the case may be, but not having a period forever for like 3-4 months at a time and then just feeling terrible the rest of the time really made me look into it further. And that's when I was diagnosed with PCOS. It took about a year for me to get a diagnosis. I was going from my family doctor to my gynecologist, back and forth, and tests and all of this kind of stuff, and finally got that diagnosis. And so it was kind of like a relief because I finally knew what was wrong. And I always knew, in my mind and my heart that something was off. I just didn't know what. And so now I knew what it was. But then, all the fears of like, well, what do I do about this? And what does this mean for me and my future and my ability to have children and all of this kind of stuff came into it. And so I knew I didn't want to go the medical route. So the birth control pills and the metformin that they wanted to give me. And I wanted to go 100% natural. And so by doing that and obviously being in nutrition school at the same time, I realized that I wanted to help other women do the same. I felt all this joy and I don't think I ever really experienced, huge amounts of joy before that because my moods were always so terrible. And just to feel that and to feel that release, that relief of not having to be depressed every time I woke up or be upset about, my weight or my skin or any of that kind of stuff. I wanted that for other women. And so that's kind of how the Hormone Diva got started. And I am just so in love with it to this day. It's my passion to be able to help other women feel the same. And nothing is more exciting than hearing from a client that they're feeling better. I'm sure that Lisa, you've had experiences like this too. And it just kind of reaffirms my passion for it. And it's amazing.
Well, sometimes you have to wonder, why did I have to go through this experience? And so it's really inspiring to see that you were able to take that and really use your own experience to support other women going through the same thing. And so I kind of want to delve a little bit deeper into your experience of it. There's a few things that you said that stand out to me. One of them is that it took a year to get a diagnosis. And it's interesting then from my perspective, and I'm sure your perspective now, because I would imagine that if a client comes to you with certain symptoms right away, it's going to clue into you that, wow, this could be PCOS. And I've worked with a number of women where, to me, it looks really obvious that it could be. Obviously, you can't diagnose someone by looking at them, right? But when a woman comes to you and they're having periods like 4 times a year, and they have cystic acne and kind of that hair in the places that you're not supposed to have it as a woman, those types of things, it kind of clicks in because this could be. So let's look at it. So maybe you could just share a little bit more about that process. Why do you think, in retrospect, it took so long just to get the diagnosis? And I'm also curious as to about how old you were at the time.
Yeah, for sure. So for my age, I was, I think, about 23 or 24 at the time. And so I came off the birth control pill. And as I mentioned, like things just went crazy. So I was off it for a couple of months before I went to my doctor to get, checked out. And she told me, oh, well, it might just take a little bit longer for your hormones to even out. Just some women are just like this, yada, yada, no real specific help in that regard. And she did a little bit of testing as far as blood labs and stuff like that, but she didn't really, everything came back as quote unquote normal or within range. So I guess that's kind of where it started to stall, but I kept having issues and I wouldn't accept that she said I was normal. I didn't accept that as an answer because I knew that what I was experiencing was not normal at all. And maybe if I wasn't in nutrition school at the time, I would have gone along with what she said for even longer because I didn't know any better, but I knew better. So I kept going back to her and finally she recommended I go see a gynecologist. We did some more blood testing and the gyno said, it looks like maybe there's some PCOS happening. And I did the ultrasound. And I think partly it took a while because one, I didn't have any cysts on my ovaries. And a lot of doctors are sticklers when it comes to that and diagnosing PCOS, even though that's only one of the 3 criteria to be diagnosed, and you only need 2 out of the 3. So I think that was part of it as well, just not having any cysts whatsoever. But the irregular periods and the symptoms of high androgens, like the hirsutism, the acne, hair loss, all of that, I had all of it. And so with all of the results from my blood labs and my symptoms, she did eventually diagnose me with PCOS. So I think that's kind of the things that played into it. Just, doctors not wanting to investigate more, me being unsure about what to do about it, and then also just not having the cysts, I think was a big part of it as well. But eventually I did get the answer I was looking for. And by the time I got that answer, that's what I thought I had. I figured it out myself. I just didn't hear it from a doctor. And thinking back throughout my whole menstruating life previous to that, I think I had PCOS right from the get-go, just from my history and what I was experiencing even as a teenager where, the other girls would have weird periods for the first couple of years or something, and then stuff evened out and they didn't have all the acne and mine just kept going and it never really stopped or settled down or anything. And so kind of thinking back, I think that it's something I've been dealing with basically forever, as long as I've been menstruating.
Mm-hmm. Well, and from the point that it was actually diagnosed, you understood what you had. You mentioned that definitely didn't want to go the traditional route. You didn't want to take the drugs. You were in nutritional school. So you thought, let me figure this out naturally. Mm-hmm. So from that point, from when you identified what was going on, what was the process like from identification to actually resolution and to see the changes that you were looking for in your cycle and also your acne, and if you had any weight fluctuations in there, what did that look like?
It was a long process, and honestly, it's still ongoing. I feel like there's always something that you can continue to tweak and to make yourself feel even better. But at the beginning, it was really overwhelming trying to figure stuff out. So I think the very day I was diagnosed, I went over to Chapters, which is, as you know, Lisa, but people listening might not know Chapters. It's a big bookstore chain out here in Canada. And so I went there directly and got a few books. They didn't have much. I think they had 2 books on PCOS, and I bought both of them. And honestly, with the knowledge that I have now, I only even agree with maybe half of what's in those books at this point. But it was a help, and it was a start just for me to kind of understand what it was that I was trying to fix. First of all, what are the things that are actually contributing and what are some steps that I can take to start fixing it? And so I started trying to play around with that myself for a few months, probably 3 or 4 months, really haphazard, just like anyone who's kind of trying to fix their health for the first time and they're not really sure what to do. You just pick random things and you hope it's going to stick. And some of it did and some of it didn't. So I decided to kind of look for some help. And I found a wonderful naturopath who is near to my area, and she also experienced PCOS. So I knew that she'd be able to not only help me, but relate. And so she got me on. I did have some weight issues when I came off the pill. I think I gained close to 20 pounds. And like I was never a skinny person, just more on the average side. So this was kind of like putting me in that little overweight bracket. And so she helped me with the weight loss at first. And she told me about fats and how important they are to hormone balance and how they can be used to actually lose fat, which was something I never really heard about before. I hadn't really delved into that too much in my nutrition education at that point. And so I did that and I changed my diet, which I already thought was healthy, but I was eating low fat all the time. And so by changing that, I really started to feel a lot better and my moods evened out and the weight evened out. The other stuff, hair loss, the acne, that stuff took the longest. And the same thing with regulating my cycles. Those things took a long time and they took dedication. Like I would say for my skin, for example, for the acne, it took about two solid years of eating well and changing my lifestyle to actually get my skin clear enough to the point where I didn't feel embarrassed to be out in public with or without makeup. So it is a long process and it was kind of frustrating, but at the same time, it was really eye-opening and kind of helped me to not just figure out, how to fix my body, but also to figure out, who I was as a person.
Well, and going through a journey like that, I mean, there's so many aspects of it that we could touch on. And some of the things that stand out to me, one of them was that it wasn't, you didn't discover that you had it and then okay, so then all I have to do is go out and do this and then it's all better. It was a process that you went through and there were a number of factors that contributed to the finally reaching that state where you're seeing things reverse and you're seeing things improve. And so I think that's a really important point. You mentioned 2 years for the acne to fully go away. That's really hard. I think a lot of women hearing that are thinking like, I'm not waiting 2 years, 2 years for that. We live in a world where everything's at our fingertips. When I was a kid, you had to get up and walk to the library, ask the librarian where to look for stuff, and you had to know how to look in the card catalog. So some people who are listening don't know what a card catalog is. And right. So, but now I can just type 3 words in my Google search on my laptop and then I have all the information. So to tell somebody that they might have to wait several months to a year or two to see a full kind of, 360 type change, type shift, that's really hard. So if you could go back and talk to your, say, 18-year-old or 20-year-old self, what would be some of the biggest takeaways? What is it that you wish you would have known back then?
I think I wish I would have known that it will get better. Even though every day it seems like you're waking up and the same things are still there, like the acne or the, moods or whatever, you're dealing with, just it will get better if you keep doing what you're doing. And I did. I really tried to be as consistent as possible with the changes that I was making. And even though the results with that consistency weren't seen overnight or over weeks or over a few months, it was a couple years, it still balanced out. It still got better. I still felt better. And my confidence grew, in both my appearance and my abilities to help myself. And so I think that's the key thing. Like, yeah, like you said, like someone might be listening and be like, oh, I don't want to wait 2 years. Well, either you do some stuff for a couple of years to help get rid of your acne or whatever the symptoms are that you're dealing with, or you deal with them for the rest of your life. So like, really, what is 2 years? It's not really a big deal, especially because it's not like I went 2 years and that entire 2 years, I still had a face covered in acne. And then like 2 years and one day I wake up and it was gone. It wasn't like that.
No.
It was a slow and gradual process. It started out where I had like the acne all over my neck and my back, my chest, my chin, my upper lip, my jawline, very painful, deep cystic stuff. And then eventually, a lot of the stuff went away, the cystic stuff to like smaller pimples. And then there was fewer of them. And then they started not showing up at all. And it was kind of like that. So you just kind of have to keep that in mind and keep in mind, why it is that you're doing what you're doing. I think that's really important as well.
Well, and as you talk about your acne, I feel like it's so tempting to act like and talk about and even to think about it as though this was a problem of acne and it was in isolation, and that was, once the acne was gone, that was it. But as you were going through this process over those 2 years, what shifts did you see in your menstrual cycle? So around the time that your acne sorted itself out, did you also see a market, like an obvious shift in your menstrual cycle and in other areas in terms of your energy and your health and your digestion, like if that was even a thing, your weight? Did you see shifts in those areas as well, or was it just the acne?
Yeah, I definitely did see shifts in all areas. The weight that I was able to drop within the first few months of changing my diet and lifestyle. So like I had 20 pounds to lose. And for me at that time, like that was really scary and that was a lot. But I know there's probably women listening who want to lose like 50 or 100 or whatever. But so it might not happen as fast as mine did. But within a couple of months, my weight evened out. My mood balanced out within a couple of weeks of changing my diet, like really dramatic as far as my mood went. My cycle took about as long as my acne did. As I mentioned before, when I came off the pill, I was having a period every 3 to 4 months. There was no predictability whatsoever. They were extremely painful, heavy, just overall unpleasant, very fatigued when I would get my period, all of that kind of stuff. And my mood, while stable otherwise, because of the changes I had made, would still be terrible premenstrually. And so eventually they went down to like every 2 months, every 60 days. And then it was kind of like every 45 to 50 days. And I stayed in between 40 and 50 days for probably about a year. And I couldn't get it to go any lower than that. So I started to make other changes. For example, I did, and I still do, acupuncture, and that made a huge difference in my cycles. And also paying more attention to self-care and stress management. So what I've learned about myself over the years is that stress is a major factor in how my cycle shows up or doesn't show up. And so if I'm really stressed and I'm not managing it well, then my period's going to be delayed because I'm not going to ovulate because I'm too stressed. It's not like I've got tons of cysts on my ovaries that are kind of stalling things. It's more of the adrenal stuff for me personally. And so once I was doing the acupuncture and making stress management and self-care a daily priority, then I started to get my cycle back into that normal range between like 32 and 34 days is usually what I'm at this point.
Mm-hmm. And interesting that also correlated with your acne and all of those things. And what you're sharing is so important. And it's basically the foundational reason that I started the podcast, which is that I think it's really tempting to look at your menstrual cycle as a problem if it doesn't fall within the normal parameters. So you think your body's broken or there's something wrong with you. But the way I look at the menstrual cycle is that it's a reflection of what's happening in your body. So if you're having 45 to 50 day cycles, that's telling you something. And so the real question is, are you listening? So can you look at that objectively without judging it, without thinking your body's broken, and instead thinking of it as a message? Like your body can't talk to you in words, but what it can do is it can reflect back to you what's happening in your life. So I think that unfortunately or fortunately gave you that invaluable opportunity to really reflect on how the stressors in your life were ultimately impacting your health in different ways.
Yeah, and I think it was a really good thing, like a gift in disguise almost. And I started to notice these kind of patterns of how stress and life events were affecting my cycle because I was tracking my cycle. I started using the fertility awareness method instead of hormonal birth control after I came off the pill. And I was tracking my moods throughout my cycle, and I was taking my basal body temperature and all of this. And so over, months and months, I began to notice these patterns. And now I'm to the point where I can predict, on certain days of my cycle, I'm likely going to feel this way or that way, or I might need harder workout in this time of my cycle, or I might need extra yoga in this time of my cycle, or whatever. And I think that's a really eye-opening experience, because periods were always something very strange and taboo, and something that, my family and my teachers and all that, like, no one really wanted to talk about. No one seemed comfortable about it. And it seemed like having a period was a bad thing. And I had to, at this point in my life, every time I get a period, I'm really excited after going through all of that time of not having it and just feeling horrible because I wasn't getting that. I almost feel like I get reset when my period comes. I just feel like a whole new woman every time. And not having that reset was really, really difficult. And it made it harder to stick with lifestyle changes because I was, upset, or I was stressed, and I just wanted to eat junk food or sit on the couch all day, or whatever the case may be. But now, being able to kind of be in tune with how I feel in different points of my cycle, I can really live my life more harmoniously, and really see, my menstrual flow as a gift, rather than, some kind of a curse or a horrible thing that I don't want to experience.
I love that so much. I really resonate with that. And I found that myself throughout my life. So my birth control, hormonal birth control history is such that I took hormonal birth control for a couple years, say maybe 2 or 3 years, from about when I was 16. And then I always joke that I was one of the strange ones who, when I actually needed contraception, so when I actually needed birth control, I went off the pill because I couldn't trust it. So I had taken it as a teenager for pain. I always had painful, heavy periods. And so in my case, I didn't take it at the right time or anything, because I wasn't taking it for birth control, but I did read all of the pamphlets. So I did know that you needed to take it at the right time if you actually wanted to use it for birth control. But I knew that I would just always be afraid. Like, I would always just, because I just was not consistent with this. So anyway, so I go off of the pill. And the point of that story is that then for the past, how many years is that? Like 15, 16, 17 years, I've just been cycling. And they call it a cycle for a reason. So when you said that when you have your period, it feels like a reset, I couldn't agree more. And I feel like there's something about the process and the different emotions that you go through in your cycle, how at some points in your cycle, I typically feel higher energy at some points, and I typically feel kind of lower energy, more introverted towards the end of my cycle before my period, kind of wanting to cocoon a little bit more. And as I get older, I find that I really do have to take that into consideration in terms of how I schedule myself and when I plan get-togethers and functions, to really take that into consideration and to honor how I feel at different points of my cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that you had touched on as well a little bit earlier was healthy diet, and how you said, I thought I was eating healthy, but then I went to the naturopath and she shared with me some knowledge about healthy fats. And so I would love for you to talk about that a little bit. I talk to a lot of women, and I'm sure you do as well. And we all think we're eating healthy. Mm-hmm. But my definition of healthy can be completely different to yours. And, every listener could have a slightly different idea of what it means to eat healthy. So I'd love for you to share your perspective on that, and even how you talk about that with the women that you work with.
For sure. So to kind of give a background of like what I was eating and I thought was healthy at the time. And like, I went into nutrition school thinking that everyone was going to be like vegan, and the teachers weren't going to say that veganism was like the best way to eat and all of this kind of stuff. And I would say like 90% vegetarian at that point. So I was eating a lot of, and if I was eating meat, it was usually chicken. And I had a lot of like those iceberg lettuce salads, like nothing much nutritionally there. And I would buy store-bought, bottled dressings, but of course, always the low cal or low fat versions, because I was afraid of fat. And I had been on who knows how many diets in my teens because I thought I was fat. And looking back at pictures, I'm just like, how could I even think that? That's just insanity. But I was always trying different diets, and a lot of them centered around low fat as being the right thing for health and for weight loss and all of that kind of stuff. So that's what I was doing. Loads of those kind of iceberg lettuce salads with not much nutritional value, maybe some chicken breast, no real fats anywhere. I was afraid to eat too much, like even of nuts and stuff, because I thought those were going to make me fat. And I was eating a lot of those like those like 100-calorie snack pack type things, like boxed different like crackers. I was a big cheese eater, like just a dairy addict, and just, lots of sugar all the time. And I didn't feel well. And so that's what I thought was, pretty healthy. I was getting my calcium from my daily glass of milk. I was getting my veggies from those salads. I was doing low fat. I thought I was doing all the right things. And then I learned about how fats, among other, nutrients, but specifically fats was the most eye-opening for me, how they impact our health and how important they are. And that the fact of, or I shouldn't say the fact, the myth of low-fat eating is just that. It's a myth, and it's based on poor, outdated science. And that when you eat more fats, especially of the right types, and you balance it out with other types of foods, it can actually be extremely beneficial for the body. And there's a lot of enjoyment in eating fats too. They have a really comforting feeling to us, like they help to calm our nervous system. It's all that comfort food, but obviously in a healthier way than like French fries or something like that. But they can be really nice, and they feel really nice. Like they have a nice mouthfeel. They're satisfying. Like you're not going to be hungry 20 minutes later if you're having some good fats in your meal, stuff like that. And so that was kind of the start. And since then, when I talk to my clients about fats, there's a few things that I like to mention. And the first is that, as tough as it is, we have to retrain our brains around this low fat stuff and kind of get rid of the fears of, eating fat is going to make us fat, because it's not true necessarily if you're eating the right types. And I like to give examples of good types of fats, because all the stuff that you're getting that's fried or in a box or a bag is using usually rancid oils, trans fats, all of that kind of stuff. And that's just creating more, hormone hell, like more inflammation and all of that kind of stuff. So things like, coconut products, coconut oil, full fat coconut milk, actual coconut itself, really, really good, high and healthy saturated fats. And we need these fats for creation of our steroid hormones. So for creating estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, cortisol, we need fats to create these hormones. And if we don't get enough, then of course our hormones are going to be out of balance. Other fats like avocados, olives and olive oil, nuts and seeds of all types, hemp, chia, walnuts, almonds, all of those kind of things, as well as the anti-inflammatory omega-3 fats, which you'll find in those nuts and seeds, leafy greens, and in fish like salmon, sardines, mackerel, anchovies. These are all really good examples of healthy fats that are going to help your body to create the steroid hormones. They're going to balance your blood sugar, because fat is the slowest digesting of the macronutrients, the other ones being protein and carbs. And so it really helps to slow any spikes of blood sugar or insulin when we eat. And if you have imbalanced blood sugar, especially if you have PCOS like I do, then it can create more androgens, leading to acne, hair loss, irregular cycles, infertility, all of that kind of stuff. So blood sugar is extremely key. Regulating your insulin is extremely key to balancing your hormones. And so using these fats are really going to help. Not to mention they'll assist your weight loss, they'll increase metabolism. For women who have hypothyroid symptoms, they can help increase basal body temperature as well. So to give you a little more heat in the body, rev up that metabolism a little bit. And they're anti-inflammatory. And inflammation is also a major root cause of many, many hormonal imbalances. So it's really important to get a variety of good types of fats in order to balance your hormones. So there's no kind of magic formula necessarily of how much of each you should be eating, but it's more about having a lot of variety in your diet. Just like, they say, eat the rainbow with your fruits and veggies. If there's such a thing as a rainbow of fats, then you need to be eating all of those as well, just to make sure that you're getting all the different types of fats that are really, really helpful for your hormones.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's so interesting hearing you talk about the way that you ate previous to the moment when you discovered fat again. And it's a part of what I was thinking was, okay, so if you wanted to try to induce PCOS symptoms, like if that was your goal, then the best way to try to do that would be to up your carbohydrate intake, lower the fat, basically eat no fat, and eat very little protein.
Yep.
And that would be a really good way to lower your hormones in general and supercharge your, supercharging your carbohydrate consumption is really going to throw off your blood sugar and shoot up your need for insulin and totally destabilize your blood sugar.
Totally.
So now that you've kind of come full circle, what are your thoughts on, I mean, I've had a number of guests on the show to talk about vegetarian diets. I've had requests from people to actually invite guests on the show to talk about the benefits of a vegetarian or vegan diet for fertility. But in good conscience and faith, I don't know how I could do that, because I would never recommend that type of diet to somebody if they were trying to conceive or planning to conceive in the future. Learning everything I have about the importance of healthy fats for hormone production, as you spoke about, and also the nutrient density specifically in foods. For me, it's not just like go eat meat and everything will be great. I think it's important to select your meat. If you're eating meat, from my perspective, I think that you should be eating the most nutrient dense meat that as possible. And that involves, liver and organ meats, which I talk about a lot, because pound for pound, you're getting 10 times to 100 times the nutrient density in the food. Anyways, I digress. So what are your thoughts on vegetarian diets, and what was your experience like during that time when you were about 90% vegetarian?
My experience was interesting. I never went 100%. I wanted to go vegan. Honestly, I used to spend hours looking at vegan blogs and just being like, oh my gosh, like that looks so amazing. I'm not killing any animals. They look so happy and all of this kind of stuff. And I wanted that. But because at the time when I was doing this, like I didn't have full control over what I was eating, still living in my mom's house and being a teenager and all of that, played into me not being 100% vegetarian or vegan. I was eating a lot of veggies and stuff like, green smoothies and whatnot, but I definitely wasn't getting enough protein. Obviously I wasn't getting enough fats, and my mood suffered. I'm sure that I would have noticed my period suffer as well as far as regularity, but I was on the pill, so that kind of took care of that for the time being. But I think my mood was the biggest thing. That was just crazy, and I was very fatigued. I couldn't keep my iron levels and B12 and all of that up to par. When I was a vegetarian, it was basically impossible for me to do that, and so I was constantly fatigued, constantly depressed and anxious. So those were kind of the biggest things for me. And also, of course, acne. I originally went on the pill because of acne and then used it later for contraceptive reasons, but it never really helped with my acne. And I think my diet also played a huge role in that as well, just not getting what I needed. And so I changed my diet to be fairly close to paleo most of the time when I was in nutrition school. And I found out that what I was doing was all wrong, basically. And so just like you, like when I run an online group program and I work with women one-on-one, and I often get women who are vegetarian or vegan, and they say, how can I modify this program for me? And so I always say, I'll help you modify it because that's your life choice. And I'm not here to tell you that you need to change that. I'm just going to kind of present you with some facts that I know to be true about how being vegan or strict vegetarian is going to negatively impact your hormones, your fertility, your moods, all of that kind of stuff, and what the benefits of including even a little bit of animal products, whether it's bone broth or swallowing some frozen pieces of liver to get your organ meats in, or whatever the case may be, just a little bit even can just make a huge difference. And so like you, I can't recommend it. I will never recommend it. But if that's someone's choice, then I try my best to support them as I can while providing them with, important information as to why including some animal product is helpful. And like for some women that I've chatted with or worked with, it's religious that they're not having any animal products or meats or anything like that. And so obviously that's something that they're not able to change because of their beliefs. And so we try to obviously find the best ways to kind of work around it. But I find that the women who do eventually start to put a little bit of animal product in their life, they usually end up feeling a lot better.
Well, and in the work that I do, I think what makes it unique is that I have a printout of how you're doing every month. So when you're using the menstrual cycle as a tool to really understand what's happening in your cycle, you can tell me up and down all day that a vegetarian diet is the healthiest option for women who are trying to conceive. But I want to see their chart. And so if I see a healthy period, meaning enough bleeding, which is one of the things typical of kind of a low hormone profile, is very light bleeding. So I want to see a healthy, robust menstrual cycle, meaning you're bleeding enough. I want to see a healthy mucus pattern, which means that you have mucus for, 3 to 6 days on average, at least 1 day of peak, but not 15 days. So I want to see like healthy mucus pattern that has, it's like a trail on sentence. Like, so your mucus pattern should have like a point and speak and then stop, right? It shouldn't just go on and on and on and on and then stop and then start talking again and then go on. Like, no. And then after that, we should see ovulation. So that's important. We know that because we're having a conversation about PCOS. So we need to see ovulation. And then after ovulation, we need to see a healthy, robust luteal phase. That's at least 10 or 11 days, ideally 12 to 14. So if you are eating a vegetarian or vegan diet and your cycle parameters are super healthy and normal, your energy is great, your body temperatures are up to where they need to be, and overall you have a healthy and happy disposition, great. But that's not what I see. So I can't recommend it either. So I'm glad we hashed that out a little bit. Because I've received, and I'm super open to talking about all kinds of stuff on the podcast, as I'm sure you know. But that's one thing that I'm not trying to present a skewed perspective, but how could I in good conscience recommend something when I physically see that many women who, I think it's one thing when you first go on it after having a kind of a bad diet, because I think you can really do some good detoxification and you're eating lots of vegetables. And I think it can be really helpful for a time. But I think that there's a certain point where it may not be helpful anymore. Anyway, so that's kind of a different topic, but I thought I'd go there a little bit because of your own history with a vegetarian diet.
Absolutely.
And so going back to diet then and fat, I've had a number of discussions on PCOS on the podcast. And of course, with PCOS, the discussion of balancing blood sugar is really central to this equation. So I would love for you to talk a little bit more about that and also how you support the women that you work with who are trying to keep the weight off. I know you had a post about high intensity interval training and just that wasn't what the post was about, but I know you talked about that. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about those things.
For sure. So you're absolutely right. Balancing blood sugar is key, especially for PCOS, but really any hormonal condition, whether it's, sex hormone related. So like endometriosis or fibroids or whatever, or maybe it's like adrenal fatigue or Hashimoto's or hypothyroidism or whatever. All of these things, if your blood sugar is not stable, you're going to have some problems. And so what we're trying to do is get blood sugar and insulin, which is your blood sugar regulating hormone, to be as stable throughout the day as possible. And there's nothing better than a good diet to help with this, and specifically fats, as I was mentioning before, because they're so slow digesting. They keep you really full, so you're not going to be overeating or binging on, who knows what, hitting up the vending machine every day at work or whatever it is, and keeping those cravings away and keeping your energy stable and your mood stable and all of that. So they really are important to balance blood sugar. And so that's what I do first with my clients is get them on some kind of a diet that's going to balance their blood sugar. Now, this might look different for different people. For example, there's a lot of information out there about low carb diets, ketogenic diet, things like that, and how helpful that is for weight loss. And I think that's true to a certain extent. When I originally was trying to lose weight after I came off the pill, I did a short-term ketogenic diet, and that was really helpful for me. But what I've noticed over the years with myself and with clients is that if you're trying to do that for extended periods of time, it can often have the opposite effect, where you start to feel sluggish again, where maybe your energy increased at first. And it's almost like what you were mentioning, going vegetarian or vegan for like a short period of time to detox. Like at first it might feel really great, but then after time, you're missing out on certain things. And so it's not just getting fats and cutting out all carbs that's going to help with weight regulation, but it's more the types of fats that you're eating, what you're combining it with. Are you getting enough protein? Are you getting loads of fiber in your diet from, lots of different colored veggies? And then once you have that good base of diet, which is where I always start, as I mentioned with my clients, you start to feel better fast when you're eating properly. And then you're more motivated to do other things like exercise, which is really important for weight loss. And you mentioned reading something I wrote about HIIT training, high intensity interval training. And this can be really helpful too. I find that like with this type of exercise, you're doing some kind of body weight, usually it's a body weight type workout, or using some weights, and you do intervals that are pretty intense, but the whole workout ends up being fairly short, 20 to 30 minutes usually, so that you're not, getting yourself overtired. But it's actually really good for your blood sugar as well, because when you exercise, especially in that fashion with the HIIT training, your body doesn't need insulin to get sugar into the cells. So normally insulin has that key to the cell door to let the sugar in so your cells can make energy from the sugars. But when you exercise, it doesn't need insulin, which is a really important thing to realize, because if you have excess insulin rolling around, it becomes like a storage hormone, specifically fat storage. And so you'll gain more weight, especially in the belly area. And I know belly fat's like a huge concern for a lot of women. They're, embarrassed about it, whatever. And it's detrimental to your health at a certain point. And so if you're exercising regularly, especially with things like HIIT training, you don't need all that insulin. And so your blood sugar is going to be regulated without using so much insulin. So you won't be storing as much fat. You're just generally going to feel better. Your energy is going to be more stable because your blood sugar is stable. Same thing goes with your mood and all of that. So, once you have a good foundation with your diet, getting those healthy fats, getting adequate protein, eating lots of veggies and healthy unprocessed carbohydrates, then thinking about, doing exercise, whether it's the HIIT training, or maybe you don't have stamina for that yet, and all you can manage is going for walks or hitting up a yoga class or whatever the case may be. Making sure to keep your body moving is going to be kind of the next piece that's going to help to balance your blood sugar and of course balance your hormones at the same time.
Mm-hmm. I think it's really interesting how there's this idea out there that in order to lose weight, you need to reduce your calorie consumption, and then you need to kind of kill yourself at the gym. And usually when you think about killing yourself at the gym, if you think about it, it's really this kind of constant long workout where let's say you're running for an hour, or you're on a bike for 45 minutes. And what's interesting then is that if that's you'll often notice, I think a lot of the listeners will resonate this, and Robin, you probably resonate with this as well. But if you have someone in your life, or if you've been in the situation where you're kind of going to the gym all the time, but you're kind of doing that slow workout where you're working hard, but you're kind of working hard at a static level for a long time. Mm-hmm. And you often hit a wall, meaning like you just don't see the results. So maybe it's kind of exactly what we were talking about with the diets, where at first you saw some results and you were losing weight, but then eventually you just don't anymore. And sometimes you gain it back and you're gaining weight, but you're exercising so much and it doesn't make sense. So I think that it's almost seems counterintuitive that you could do less differently and actually have a better result. But with the high intensity interval training, that's exactly what it is, where you kind of go full out with the weights, for example, for a minute or two or 5, and then you stop and then take a break, and then you do it again, and then you stop and you take a break. And that can have and does have in the research too, it shows that it has a much more significant effect on weight loss and kind of hormonal health and production as well, which is really interesting.
Absolutely. And like with those kind of long, steady state workouts, like you were talking about, going on the treadmill for an hour or doing one of those crazy boot camp classes, like that's just going to raise your cortisol to a point that you don't want. And if you have hormonal imbalances already, chances are your adrenals are having a little bit of trouble. And if you continue to do workouts like that are very long, you can end up fatiguing your adrenal glands, which will push down any production of your sex hormones like estrogen and progesterone, especially, leading to more problems and more fatigue and more weight gain and more irregular periods and infertility issues and all of that kind of stuff, because it's stressing the body out too much. And if you're also doing calorie reduction at the same time, you're not giving your body what it needs. I find sometimes women who come to me and they're doing this, reducing their calories and doing those kind of steady state workouts, especially a lot of cardio, and they come to me and they can't lose weight and they're gaining despite all these efforts. When they slow down, they eat more. So I tell them to increase their calories and reduce their workouts and change up what they're doing with their workouts a bit. That's when the weight starts to shift in a lot of them. And you're absolutely right. It seems counterintuitive. It goes against everything that we've kind of been taught about weight loss and how to be healthy. But it's really, you need to support your body to produce the hormones. You need to support your body to make the energy. You need to support your body to calm the nervous system, all of these kind of things. And when you do that, then it becomes, a little bit easier to shift the weight in the right direction.
I attended a conference recently here in Toronto. It was actually downtown at the university. Well, now I don't know exactly which building, but it was one of the University of Toronto buildings. And Dr. Dennis Wilson was presenting on the first day, and he did 2 different presentations. And one of the presentations that he did was about weight loss. And he's done some really interesting research in this area. And to really give some insight into exactly what you're saying, where it seems counterintuitive to tell your client essentially to eat more, but eat differently and exercise differently. And so what he found in the research that he's done is that what happens when you basically up the exercise, the consistent static type exercise, and you are trying to reduce your calories. So you're doing caloric restriction where, see, I'm not a calorie counter, but let's say, if you need 100 calories a day, then you're kind of going down to 1,500. He showed a survey. So what happens when you're restricting your calories is, you're starving yourself. So that stresses out your body, and your body thinks that it's it thinks that there's a famine. And so because your body then doesn't have enough fuel to operate, what it does is it actually lowers your metabolism. And I think the most interesting aspect of the research that he was sharing was that lowered metabolism, it's persistent. So in the studies that they've done, when you do caloric restriction like that, then a year later, the participant's metabolism is still low. And so that really gives a lot of insight into why that paradigm of dieting doesn't work. One of the things that Dr. Wilson spoke about was intermittent fasting, which is really interesting. And so I think you can take anything to the extreme. But I think in the most simplest terms, which is very interesting, is he talked about, say, France, where they eat 3 meals a day. So you eat breakfast, and in line with what we're talking about, you have a really good mix of protein, carbohydrates, and fats. And so you're not restricting your calories at all. You're probably eating more calories, but you're eating healthy, good food. You're having a really robust meal, and then you stop eating. And then lunchtime comes around and you have, again, a really good, healthy meal, again, not restricting calories, having a really good mix of protein, fat, carbohydrates, healthy stuff. But then again, you stop. And then you don't eat again until supper. And then after supper, same idea, you stop eating, and then you don't eat again until morning. And so what's interesting, and I'll get to the point, so I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but I think it's important and relevant to our conversation. But what's interesting is because, as you talked about, insulin is a fat storage hormone. And so then what he talked about was when you're eating, you're in that state where your insulin levels are up, and that's basically your body's running on, sugar. Your body's running on that fuel. But what happens is when you have intervals between your meals, eventually your body processes that food, your insulin levels go down, and then you actually switch from fat storage mode to fat burning mode. So it's not that you're starving yourself. Your body is just switching fuels. So he talks about how it's actually really important when you eat. It's important what you eat, but it's also important when you eat. And so if you're able to create that situation where you're not grazing all day, then you allow your body at times to switch into fat burning mode. And that in and of itself controls your blood sugar, because obviously when you're burning fat, your blood sugar isn't spiking.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that totally makes sense, and is exactly what I like to share with my clients as well. And it's hard sometimes, like fears come up, I find, when they start to make these kind of changes and eat more and maybe work out less or differently or whatever. And there's a lot of fear around gaining more weight. But I often recommend, like when we're first starting, a lot of people are used to the grazing, like you were talking about, and constantly eating all day because they're hungry or they're tired or they're moody or stressed or whatever. And so can be easy when you shift your diet and you first start changing to include a little snack in between your meals. And then once you've started to feel a little bit better, let's say after 4 to 6 weeks, then to start thinking about not having snacks in between your meals. And in the online program I run, that's exactly what I teach, to, as much as possible, make sure that you have really nourishing, healthy, and fulfilling meals 3 times a day, so that you wouldn't need to be snacking as much, so that your insulin levels have a chance to reset in between.
Such powerful information. And it kind of, it seems counterintuitive, because in a way then, by working with your body and giving your body what it needs, instead of having, so the image of, the Biggest Loser comes to mind, right? And it's almost like this weird, like, fat person punishment camp, right? Like it just seems like torture. I don't like to, it's not one of the shows that I like to watch. Like there's a lot of guilty pleasures that I have, but The Biggest Loser isn't one of them, because it just seems cruel, right? It just seems like society's saying, like, there's something wrong with you because you're big. And so we're going to punish you by making you like not eat, like basically starve you and then put you on a treadmill. And this is our idea of weight loss and what it's supposed to be like. But it turns out that makes it worse, as you talked about, raising the cortisol levels from starving your body, and, the increased static exercise, having that increased effect of cortisol and having that mess up your hormones. And so it's so interesting, because then you can actually eat more, and let's be honest, when you put fat on food, it tastes amazing. So steam some broccoli and then like melt some butter and put it on top, and tell me that it doesn't taste better, So you're able to enjoy the experience of eating a bit more. You're able to nourish your body, and with a way less work and effort, then you're able to make a bigger impact on your weight loss. And of course, it doesn't mean that you're going to do this and you're going to lose all the weight in one day or anything, but the actual process of losing weight can be a lot less, I don't know, like less like a punishment.
Exactly. And not just like a punishment because of, the crazy tough workouts you're doing, or eating like 3 peas with your like little tiny piece of chicken with dinner, or whatever the case may be, but also, and how it affects us mentally, I think is important to mention too, because it gets us into this thing of, we're not good enough. We need to do all of this crazy stuff. So we feel terrible doing it. It isolates us from our family and friends, because we don't want to go out to eat, because we have to, nothing is low fat in a restaurant, like, there's nothing to eat or whatever. And it really affects us mentally in a negative way as well. And then doesn't that just start the vicious cycle of, oh, forget this diet, like I'm just going to binge on ice cream and chips and pizza and all of this kind of stuff. And then you gain the weight back, but you gain more than you lost in the first place. And you end up feeling worse than you did before you started that diet. And it's just this horrible thing that can be totally, stepped over if you just, include some fats and enough calories and some decent but not like crazy long workouts. And it might not be as fast, as restricting yourself to 1,200 calories a day might have initially give you 5 to 10 pounds in a week. Sometimes I've heard stuff like that. It might not be as fast, but it's going to be much more sustainable. You're going to feel much better doing it. And then, of course, they're going to be more likely to keep it going and maintain in the future.
Yes, I think that it's important to make it. I think it's more, it has a broader and greater impact, in my opinion, to make subtle changes that you can actually stick to that make sense for you versus trying to do, I mean, you can't sustain 1,200 calories a day. That's not, you just can't. It's quite literally that you're starving yourself. So, as we come to the close of our interview today, I would love to hear just a little bit more about the mindset around eating. Our show today, we didn't delve into disordered eating, but of course that's what's on the periphery of this discussion. When you're really restricting your eating, you're super scared that everything you eat is going to make you fat, and having that really negative relationship with food, which is actually what sustains us and nourishes us. So I'd love to hear just some thoughts on how you support clients who you find are having trouble with that. Getting their head around eating healthy.
That's really tricky. I think we all have a little bit of, food baggage where we have some emotional ties to foods, or even some women, like when we get right down to it, their fears about changing their diet come down to, if I take this out of my diet, or if I want to eat more healthier, or if I want to do more of this with my food or whatever, then my friends or my spouse or my family or whatever, they won't want to hang out with me. They won't love me. If I make these changes, my whole life's going to change, but for a negative way. And so that can really affect us and stop us from moving forward. But a lot of times it comes down to, first of all, talking about it. So putting a voice to it. Like, for example, I started with this new client last week, and she had a lot of issues. In the past, she had anorexia, and now she had not occasional, but more regular binging, but she was hiding it from her husband. He had no idea. And so she didn't want to share it with him. She was afraid to put a voice to it and all of that. And so I shared with her that it might be helpful to actually tell him about the struggles, like, not necessarily some crazy like intervention style sit down or whatever to lay it all out on the table, but just to share the struggles. When you're not keeping it inside, you're able to let it go. And so I think that's the first step, is whether it's with, a practitioner like me or like you, Lisa, or with a family member that maybe you're hiding your binging or your emotional eating or whatever, talk about it, let it go, put a voice to it, say, I'm really struggling with binge eating right now, even if you don't know why, putting a voice to it, letting it go. And then after that, they usually start to feel a little bit lighter, which is nice, and mentally or emotionally. And then knowledge comes in. So learning why eating a certain way, like including more fats and adequate protein and really healthy carbs, why is this going to be beneficial for the body? And I find, like, once you kind of know that stuff, you can't unlearn it, and it becomes just a way of life almost as you make these things into habits. So after the letting go or during, and you're making these changes, and once you start to see results, that tends to really shift the mindset as well. But then there's always going to be times where we have emotional eating. And I talk about with my clients accepting that, there's going to be Christmases and parties and all of this stuff where there's going to be, cake and ice cream and all these things that you feel like are bad and you shouldn't be eating. Eat them, that's fine. Just eat it. Like, you don't need to feel guilty about food. Food is there to nourish you. Without it, you cannot live. Literally, you cannot live without food and water. And so we really just need to stop the guilt and switch that to a mindset of nourishing our bodies, giving ourselves what we need to not only function, okay, but also to feel really good. Not just, barely keeping it together, but actually feeling like you have energy and you can handle the stresses that come at you and you can deal with anything that comes your way. And so I think that's, a huge part of it is kind of working to let go of what you're holding on to. And that includes the guilt as well, really trying to let that go. Like, now, if I have something that, if someone were to see me, they'd be like, she's a nutritionist and she's eating this. Like, I don't feel any guilt. I eat pizza and ice cream just like you guys. Like, it's not an every night thing, but it happens every once in a while. And I don't feel any guilt over that. But it does take, just like, my acne took 2 years to clear up. Like, these kind of emotional eating patterns and mindsets and thoughts, they take time too. So it's just, again, being consistent with with trying to change the way that you think about your food and how it benefits or hurts your body.
And there is no perfection. That's not a thing. It doesn't exist. And so when you eat the foods that you love to eat, be present, enjoy it, take your time, taste everything, and really go into that experience and enjoy it guilt-free. I think that's really important to do. And so, Robin, we've talked about so many different things. We've had a fantastic conversation today. If there was one thing that you would want for the listeners to take away from our conversation, what would it be?
Get support. You can't do it alone. It's too hard. It really, like the diet, the exercise, the mindset, or all three. If you need support for those things from professionals or your family, your friends, your coworkers, whatever, people in your life, get that support. Everything else becomes much easier.
Wonderful words to end on. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Robin. It was a pleasure to have the opportunity to chat with you and to dive into these topics.
Absolutely. I had a great time. Thanks so much for having me.
And where can the listeners go to find out more about you, your website, and all of the places?
Yeah, so they can find me at www.thehormonediva.com. You can find links to all my social media and everything on there too. If you want to join me on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, we've got all blogs on there. You can contact me through there. So thehormonediva.com is the place to be.
Okay, well, thank you so much again for coming on the show. It was a blast. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes for today's episode at fertilityfriday.com/163. I really hope that you enjoyed my episode today with Robin. Thank you again, Robin, for coming on the show. That was a fantastic conversation. It was so much fun to be able to talk with Robin about PCOS and her own journey with PCOS and what really made the difference for her in terms of diet, nutrition, incorporating healthy fats and acupuncture, and how it impacted her menstrual cycle and her acne, and also a really realistic and honest view about the time frame. I think it's really important to have a discussion around time frame when it comes to using non-invasive methods to improve your health in a gradual, gentle type of way. I think it's really helpful to come into that with a knowing that there's never an immediate turnaround for these changes. What you see is a gradual shift. And I know that in the work that I do, it's so helpful to be able to rely and fall back on the menstrual cycle and to be able to observe the gradual shifts and changes in the menstrual cycle as you make these changes. It is really unique, eye-opening, and I feel like it's really a privilege to be able to see that. It's so helpful in the work. So in the work that I do with women, when I start working with somebody, we go through the Justice charting protocols and really get a sense of what your cycles are doing today. So in a sense, it's similar to doing a blood test in that you see what your levels are today and you see what you're starting with. You have a really clear picture. So that's what the first couple of charts are really like. When I start working with somebody, it really gives us a good baseline to see what we're working with and what the parameters of your cycle are. And as we work together to figure out what could be happening, what some of the underlying factors could be, and we make shifts, whether it's nutritionally or whether it's lifestyle factors, but you really see quite immediately if these things are working. So it doesn't mean that you're going to start making shifts and you're going to have a completely different cycle, but you are able to see the way that the changes that you're incorporating shift your cycle. So from cycle to cycle, you really get a sense of whether or not what you're doing is working when you're starting to see changes in the right direction. So I really love the way that Robin talked about that process and shared how it is actually a process and there isn't just one magical thing that solves everything, but it was a combination of the different things that she was doing that over time really made the shift. And I think it was really helpful to have her share as well that, yeah, it can take a little bit of time. It can take several months of consistent working towards improving diet, lifestyle factors, all those types of things. But then the results that you get, those stick around. So once you sort it out and improve your health kind of from the root cause, as opposed to just dealing with the symptoms, then the changes that you get and the changes that you see they're more likely to stick around. And so I just wanted to highlight that because I feel like that was a really powerful message that came out of our conversation today. So if you've been enjoying the podcast, please do look for it on iTunes and leave a 5-star review so that more people can find it. If this is the first time that you're listening to the show, don't forget to subscribe and you'll always be notified when I release a new episode. I release a new episode every week, and some occasional weeks I release bonus episodes, but those are more sporadic. They're not on a schedule, but at least once a week you'll hear a new episode from me. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any episodes coming up. And if you're new to the show, there are well over 130 previous episodes, and there's some amazing episodes that relate to what we've spoken about in today's show. In particular, there are a few episodes that I recorded with Lily Nichols, which I'll link into the show notes, where we spoke about PCOS, we spoke about undereating, and also about HPA axis dysregulation and how real food can really help with that. So definitely check out that episode. So again, you'll find the show notes at fertilityfriday.com/163. And I also have a list of all of my PCOS specific episodes. If you head over to fertilityfriday.com/PCOS, then you'll find a list. And if you've either been recently diagnosed, if you were searching and you found this episode because you were looking for more information about PCOS, I have some really great episodes with guests who have specialized in the area of PCOS. And so lots of great information in those episodes if you have not yet listened to them. So again, that's fertilityfriday.com/PCOS. I've worked with a number of clients that actually have received a PCOS diagnosis. And what's interesting, again, is two things. One, how it's even possible that a woman can have obvious, in my opinion, PCOS, meaning that her cycles, delayed ovulation, super long menstrual cycle lengths, etc., different cycle-specific symptoms that I'm looking for when I'm looking at a woman's charts, and how those can be undiagnosed for years. It really blows my mind. So that's one of the things. And the other part of it is just that often there's this idea that it doesn't matter if your cycles are a hot mess, for lack of a better word, but it doesn't matter if you have PCOS if you're not trying to have children. And so that is something that's really common, and I hear my clients say a lot, which is that, well, the doctor said that, just take the pill until you're ready to have kids, and then we'll worry about it then. And two things that just are really interesting and frustrating about PCOS. So, if you have questions about your cycle, or you're wanting to gain a deeper insight into what's happening in your cycle or the connection between your cycle and your overall health, or you're just looking to really gain confidence in using fertility awareness or making the transition between hormonal birth control and, natural non-hormonal birth control via fertility awareness, I would love to work with you. I have a number of programs that I offer. And so you can head over to fertilityfriday.com/workwithme for additional information. I have all the programs that I have listed there. So again, that's fertilityfriday.com/workwithme. So I just want to thank you again for taking the time out of your day to listen to the show and to hang out with me. It's because of you that I keep podcasting. I always say that. And I always say that when I first started podcasting, I really had no idea how much of an impact the show would have. And so nearly 3 years in, it's really incredible to see how many women have been positively impacted by the show, and just, what's become of my initial kind of dream to just put the information out there. My whole idea was like, well, let me just put the information out there and see if anyone cares what I have to say. And so I'm really happy to report that now I've created a community. And for those of you who, I mentioned the community already, so if you haven't yet joined the Facebook community, just head over to fertilityfriday.com/community. There's always lots of great conversations happening in there. And, thanks again for listening. Have a great week. Have a great weekend whenever you're getting around to listening to the episode. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.